Hey everyone! Today we'd like to take you on a little trip down memory lane, back to the good times at the National Theatre where we saw Tanika Gupta's A Tupperware of Ashes, and the Barbican, where we saw Emma Rice's The Buddha of Suburbia. But we don't just want to revisit the scenes and plots we either loved or hated. Instead, we'll be dissecting the shows, recalling key moments that give us insight into memory itself. Specifically, we'll be talking about cultural memory and how theater can serve as a medium to explore it, to bring it into conversation with the audience. Plays like A Tupperware of Ashes and The Buddha of Suburbia are great examples. They showcase how theater serves as a preservative remedy for otherwise undocumented cultural memories. But to start off, let's briefly provide some definitions of cultural memory. Cultural memory is the faculty that allows us to build a narrative picture of the past, and through this process develop an image and an identity for ourselves. But cultural memory has also been explained as the constructed understanding of the past that is passed from one generation to the next through text, oral traditions, monuments, rites, and other symbols. Basically, cultural memory is all the long-held traditions of an identity group. So their spiritual rites, customary food or clothing, classic stories, etc., which are carried on and interpreted by the present generation. For a long time, the way people thought about cultural memory was generally uncomplicated. It lined up perfectly with national boundaries. But in a post-colonial and more globalized era, cultural memory becomes more complicated. How, for example, does a diasporic people understand themselves? Can cultural memory be continued when a person is removed from the origin of most of those cultural memories? Or how does someone with a hybrid identity, like the family in A Tupperware of Ashes or Kareem in The Buddha of Suburbia, relate to cultural memory? Do they feel that the tension between their identities forces them to make a choice about which culture to remember and which culture to forget?
Tanika Gupta's Tupperware of Ashes is a performance that has a heavy reliance on the concept of semiotics, the language of signs and symbols. In order to weave the memory of one's Southeast Asian cultural memory into the fabric of British theater, Gupta uses semiotics as her metaphorical needle. She turns everyday items from mere props into symbols that communicate ideas and emotions pertaining to cultural and personally important concepts. We get a better understanding of semiotics through the viewpoint of Italian medieval historian and philosopher Umberto Eco, who states, "A semiotics of the mise-en-scène is constitutively a semiotics of the production of ideologies." In other words, the semiotic elements found on the stage, such as props, lighting, characters, and any other aspect of the production's mise-en-scène, actively contributes towards the presentation of an idea or a way of thinking that is manifested in the meaning of the production. One of these important props from within the show would be the mangoes from the Mindapur rainforest, and specifically how they are interacted with by the characters in the production. Their true nature as props are that of squishy foam that is balled up into the palms of the actors' hands, allowing them to appear in the dementia sequences, utilizing flashes of lighting and color to disguise where these mangoes really appear from. There is a heavy and reminiscent symbolism of the sweet taste of one's past that truly can only be appreciated from experience and memory, rather than looking in from the outsider's perspective, such as Queenie's children attempting to look through the window of her own inner world. Of course, there is also the Tupperware of Ashes itself, a mundane object transformed into a casket for Queenie's body and a profoundly emotional time capsule for the ancestral past of Queenie's children. An object of otherwise little importance has been given a spiritually impactful meaning, serving as the vessel by which Queenie's children will return their mother, a vessel of her own, but for her long-forgotten memories, through which they will symbolically release their cultural identity back into the place where their mother desired they would one day be able to call their home. Dementia, of course, plays an important role within the performance as well, and is semiotically made present through the use of sounds, lighting, and juxtaposition of characters. We as the audience are watching a performance within a performance as Queenie navigates her own scenes within the scene itself, interacting with characters that have no physical presence, interacting with worlds that are only made clear by colored lighting and sound effects, and creating physical distance on stage between her and her family throughout the play, with the space getting consistently bigger over time, even to the point where physical barriers such as walls and windows create a distance even farther than just the length of the stage can support.
In The Buddha of Suburbia, Hanif Qureshi draws heavily from his own experience as the son of a South Asian immigrant father and a British mother in 1970s London. This semi-autobiographical narrative reflects the tension of dual identity, being neither fully British nor entirely South Asian. Kareem mirrors Qureshi's struggle, and in turn, his identity is shaped by the conflicting expectations of his traditional South Asian roots and the progressive, rebellious spirit of British counterculture. Qureshi uses Kareem's journey to highlight the fluidity of identity in a multicultural setting. Kareem embraces this hybrid identity, or this third space, by blending elements from both cultures to form a unique sense of self. Kareem's fashion choices in particular illustrate his negotiation of dual identity. Unlike his father, who represents the older generation's commitment to traditional values, Kareem rarely dons overtly South Asian attire. Instead, his wardrobe reflects London's movements of the 1970s, punk, glam rock, and bohemian styles. These choices symbolize his rejection of rigid cultural expectations and his alignment with the rebellious spirit of the era. Such omission symbolizes the fading of cultural memory in the second generation of immigrants. When cultural markers do appear, such as his velvet vest, they are often repurposed or blended with Western elements, reflecting the evolving nature of cultural memory in a diasporic context. Ultimately, clothing becomes a metaphor for the evolving nature of cultural memory, where inherited traditions are not abandoned but transformed to fit the realities of diasporic life. A key moment in the Boot of Suburbia that highlights the distortion of cultural identity is Kareem's casting as Mowgli in a racially stereotyped production of The Jungle Book. This role, and particularly the offensive costume, commodifies Kareem's heritage, reducing it to a colonial caricature for a Western audience. The dehumanizing costume forces Kareem to confront both external racism and internal questions about belonging. A similar moment of overt stereotyping occurs when Eva invites Haroon to present for an audience his Oriental philosophy. The 1970s social setting plays a crucial role in shaping and reflecting Kareem's identity as well. The music of the era, particularly punk and glam rock, represents rebellion and individualism. In the show, we hear snippets of David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Sex Pistols, Bob Dylan, and The Clash. Here, music becomes a vehicle for exploring the tension between honoring cultural memory and forging a new identity in a Western context. Through Kareem's journey, Qureshi raises the critical question, when does a progressive mindset become an abandonment of cultural identity? While Kareem's rejection of traditional values might seem like a loss of cultural memory, it also signifies a reinvention of heritage that incorporates both British and South Asian influences. This hybrid identity emphasizes how dual identity individuals often face a choice in preserving their respective cultures. By blending traditional and modern influences, these works redefine cultural memory as a site of transformation and resistance. The very show itself breathes life into Qureshi's experience of dual heritage and becomes a vessel for remembering this tension.
A Tupperware of Ashes and the Buddha of Suburbia engage with notions of cultural memory in their own ways, but crucially, theater itself serves as a medium through which cultural memory can be preserved or transformed. British South Asian theater is one example of how members of a diaspora can redefine their identities and heritage within a post-colonial context. Thus, theater provides an artistic tool through which South Asian creatives can explore generational and diasporic tensions regarding cultural memory, ultimately embracing tradition, forging new pathways, or striking a balance in between. A particular production's choices and an audience's interpretation of those choices continuously lend themselves to new and important conversations about British South Asian representation, belonging, and legacy. Our presentation takes on the form of a scrapbook, which is intended to highlight a few significant themes. As discussed during our presentations of A Tupperware of Ashes and the Buddha of Suburbia, cultural memory often takes physical form, such as in clothing, food, and other mementos. The physical nature of a scrapbook demonstrates the importance of objects and one's understanding of their heritage and identity. More crucially, however, both scrapbooks and British theater receive new additions over time that continuously reshape how we remember and understand our lives, our past, and our culture as a whole. As time passes, older scrapbook entries and past theater productions themselves can become part of a diaspora's cultural memory. British South Asian theater allows members of the South Asian diaspora to investigate and redefine their identities in the context of memory and post-colonialism. The two productions we saw directly confronted the experience of hybrid identity among British South Asians, and both shows work to demonstrate the tensions between one's ethnic heritage and one's cultural belonging to contemporary Britain. These realistic depictions of hybrid identity are crucial not only because they represent a widespread and important struggle on stage, but also because they create productions that literally embody their narrative themes. In other words, British South Asian theater itself reflects the negotiation involved in dual heritage. There are intersectional components to this conversation too. For example, Queenie's womanhood and Kareem's queerness change how they understand their places within Indian culture and within British culture. This representation is vital for British South Asians generally, but also for more marginalized and intersectional voices within that diaspora that have been historically silenced by the British Empire. Overall, British South Asian theater gives South Asian writers, actors, and directors a much-needed platform to engage with years of colonialism, oppression, othering, hybrid identity, and all the meaning and beauty in between. As a diaspora that has often been deprived of the ability to preserve their own memory and create their own stories within a Western context, British South Asians are able to reclaim power through the magic of theater. While A Tupperware of Ashes and The Buddha of Suburbia look at the tragedy of the past, they also look at the promise of the future. South Asian representation has a long way to go in the United Kingdom, but the crucial steps taken by South Asian creatives to explore and redefine cultural memory are making waves. The reclamation of cultural memory through British South Asian theater signals a hopeful beginning, but also a continuation of the importance of art and its ability to enact change throughout history.